College professors of Reddit. What is the dumbest thing a student has said or done? Story 1, I was at a final one time, and the professor was counting the students. He then said I printed off exactly enough tests. But there appears to be one more student than tests, so if you're here and have never seen my face, please leave. Someone got up and left. We are all very confused what that dude was thinking. Edit, this was an 8 a.m. chemistry final on a Saturday. Story 2, hey, erase a story from one of my husband's colleagues after an exam. A student told the professor I didn't know the answers to the essay questions, so I made up my own essay questions and answered them. The professor replied, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. And when I go to lunch, I'm going to tell all my friends. Story 3, I overheard two students have the following conversation. Student 1, isn't it awesome we get to live right by the ocean? Student 2, that's not an ocean. 1, but it has a beach. If it's not the ocean, what is it? 2, I don't know. I work in Chicago. Edit, a lot of questions and replies. This was at a satellite campus downtown in the Loop for graduate professional programs, which means the students were probably at least 23 or 24 years old. Lake Michigan is indeed very large and feels like the ocean, but these young ladies had cell phones and could have easily Googled it to get their answer. I do appreciate how many responses aren't cruel, but are forgiving of why they may have been confused. There were definitely American students, but I'm guessing just not real critical thinkers. Story 4, college course. Students are asked to estimate the date in which Attila took over Europe. It wasn't a history class. The goal was showing that people's estimates are influenced by those of the people around them, except that the first girl said 6,000. When the professor said 6,000 what? She replied AD. Story 5, TA here. My favorite was a student who came up to the professor after class and asked if he could take the quiz a day late because it was on arm day and his arms would be too tired to write. Story 6, word for word copying of an assignment. Even down to the other guy's student number, spelling mistakes, and format. Edit, consolidating some stuff mentioned in later posts. 1, I gave both a 0 for the assignment. 2, smart guy deliberately gave his assignment to the dunce to be copied. 3, department policy is to fail both in cases like this. Obviously, it's different if dunce stole smart's assignment and copied. For this cuts down on cheating, either by people doing the copying or people enabling them by allowing cheaters to thrive. If this was not enforced, potentially we could have situations where 1 or 2 or 3 people in class do the work and everybody else copies from them and therefore learns nothing. This is not what we want. Story 7, not me, but my aunt has taught college and high school level history courses. She once assigned a paper on something to do with the role of rhetoric in the Roman Empire. I don't remember the exact wording of her assignment, but it was something to this effect. A student completely and entirely missing the point of the assignment and possibly of the English language in general, spun an elaborate paper of the fictional life and military and political career of a Roman soldier, named Rhetoric. My aunt still has the paper somewhere. It's a hoot. Story 8, not me, but a colleague. 2 students came to see him during office HRS with a complaint your exams discriminate against students who can't think. He swears that's a direct quote. I think they must meant to say something like, can't think under pressure, but that's not how it came out. Out of morbid curiosity, he asked them what their major was. Answer, we're both pre-med. Yeah, you might want to rethink that plan, kids. Story 9, biology professor here. I had a student give a presentation on genetics. Only, it wasn't so much genetics, but a compilation of neo-Nazi websites saying that Hitler was right for purifying the gene pool. Had to shut that down real quick. Story 10, I was a TA in a college psychology class, and one of the papers asked, how would you explain emotions to an alien from another planet who didn't have any? Some kid's answer was how had explain emotions to a Chinese person. Story 11, TA, for a glass-blowing class my university has, so my school is very STEM-focused, like 70 engineering majors, so there isn't a lot of artistic talent among us, but some people are really bad. So I had one guy who was struggling, and no matter what I did, he just wasn't getting it. His pieces were generally very small, sloppy, asymmetrical, etc. So for his final, he hands in this beautiful vase. Cool colors, symmetric, nice size and weight. Well, the professor was looking it over and giving her compliments except one problem. She had made it a few days before, and it went missing from the shelf where we put pieces while we wait for people to pick them up. So the guy tries to turn in a piece made by the actual professor. TLDR guy tries to hand in a glass art piece, tries to pass it off as his own. Turn out the prof made it, and he stole it, and tried to give it back as his final. Edit, no, it isn't MIT. I have neither the brain nor the money for that. Edit 2, fun fact, you can actually get away with touching hot glass with your bare hands. Once a day, since the glass is so hot, it will instantly vaporize the oil in your skin, creating a layer of gas which protects you. It's called the Leidenfrost effect. Also, don't try it at home. Story 12, oh, let me count the ways I had a student miss his midterm exam because, and I quote, I got fired from my band and I was too bummed out to come to school. I had another adult student, 35, who pitched a fit during a meeting of students and teachers to figure out times for private lessons because he claimed we were disorganized. I got him calmed down enough to resume the scheduling, and then he went off again, ending with, if this had been the Marines, someone would have been shot by now. Then there was the student who thought he was too cool for school and used to wear mirrored sunglasses all the time, as in class, etc. One Monday, he didn't show up to class, and it turned out that over the weekend had been at a party where there was alcohol, and it got raided by the cops. Since he was underage, he tried to run for it, but since he was wearing his shades, and it was at night, he ran face first into a fence instead. Edit to everyone who has written explaining or justifying these people's behavior. These were 3 of the all-round worst students I've ever seen in a college environment in close to a decade and a half of teaching. I don't just mean in scholastic aptitude, but in attitude as well. I'm usually ready to cut people some slack, but in all 3 of these cases, it was the posturing and air of entitlement that goes with that stood out from the usual lame excuses. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written about them. You make your bed, you'd better be prepared to sleep in it. Story 13, I'm not a professor, but one of my professors told us this funny story. He was teaching one of the basic level literature classes, a class that only exists for students to fulfill the core curriculum requirements. So, of course, the class is full of students who don't care about interpreting literature. There was a group of students in the back, all friends, all frat bro types, business majors after the final exam. One of those guys emailed the professor and said, "Why did I get a D on the final? I copied off my friend next to me, and you gave him a C?" That's bull. My professor was shocked because our school has a no-tolerance rule. Anyone found guilty of plagiarism gets expelled. He decided to ignore the email because he was so indifferent to that student. Story 14, we were having a lecture for a course about cultural awareness. The lecturer asks, any questions? One guy raises his hand and asks, is the Murray River brown? Because Aborigines bathe in it. Story 15, I teach English at a private Christian college. While discussing The Weight of Glory by C.S. Lewis, we broached the topic of Abraham's bosom as shown in the story of the rich man and Lazarus. I say to the class, being mature, what is a bosom? Dead silence from the back of the classroom. I hear a voice. A but now. I try not to mock my students for any reason, but I couldn't help but laugh after I collect myself. I say, no, it's not a but. After Lazarus died, he did not go to Abraham's, but after class, he told me that the passage in question made a lot more sense to him now. Story 16, not a professor, but a graduate TA here. We gave an exam question where the students had to explain the difference between wild boars and domesticated pigs and how those traits reflect current theories of domestication. More than one student referred to the boar's tusks as horns, but one particular student wrote the whole answer about how pigs lost their antlers due to domestication. Pig antlers. As a note, I double-checked, and he was a native English speaker too. So, this was not an issue of translation. Story 17, when we have you turn papers into an online anti-cheating software. Don't buy the paper from a previous student on those note-sharing sites. I promise you it's in the database. Edit yes. Turn in at all marks false positives all the time. Some critical thinking skills by the evaluator are required for it to be used effectively. Story 18, I was a college lab TA for many years, and we used to actually keep a running log of all the stupid stuff students would do. My favorite to this day, student T, and my thermometer isn't working. Can you please take a look? Me walk over and look at the setup. Try not to burst out laughing. That's a pipette, student, not a thermometer. He literally forgot what a thermometer looks like. Story 19, college English professor here. I shared this list once before a while ago, but thought it was worth sharing again. In my early days of my PhD program, I participated in an accreditation assessment project that required us to grade hundreds of essays from first and second semester freshman composition classes to see if there was any improvement from the first semester to the second. Good news, there was. This was dull, tedious work, and to pass the time we started compiling a list of some of the funniest and most baffling lines from the essays we were grading. I present to you a selection of some of those lines. Before we get to it, though, I do want to offend these students and say that many of these actually came from decent essays where the student also managed to say something silly or ridiculous or had a very funny misspelling. Writing is hard. I'm about as much of a pro as you can be at it, and I still struggle with it. Please keep that in mind while enjoying these. A firestorm is like a tornado, but it's full of fire. Some of those figures would be Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King Jr., Jackie Robinson, and many other big-named athletes. Life starts at the point of contraception. Napoleon is more than just a symbolic, well-dressed short guy that never lost a battle in his life. He was just an average man with many flaws who achieved many great things because of his ruthless tactics and oppressive behavior. Being a police officer is not longer cool, and people don't want to do that. If we did not have penicillin available to us right now, so many people would not be living. Most people see Hitler as pretty much the Antichrist, but there are many sides to every story. Even as early as the early 1950s, the winds of change could be detected in the air, but even the early 1950s could be considered the early years of change. Diamond mining from an oblivious viewpoint is a wonderful bestowment. The social norm is for a man and a woman to be together so that they can teach their children the proper roles in society. Fathers teach their sons to be strong and in charge, while mothers teach their daughters how to clean, cook, dress. In puberty, parents don't have enough knowledge of ed to be teaching their kids, but the schools do. Food does not seem to be doing its intended job of keeping consumers healthy and alive with competence. Recently, China decided that there is not enough territory in the world for its population. China's scientists began to think what they can do, and they found a solution. China is going to invade the moon. One time Americans thought the Earth was the center of the universe. Approximately 1 in 5 convicted offenders against children had victimized a child under the age of 18. It is amazing to think that our country was started by a bunch of religious farmers and regular people with jobs, not by any major superheroes, and is as big and powerful as it is today. According to the FCC, the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission. In just 50 years, the world has changed from a conservative dwelling to a free masterpiece. The birth of Franklin is usually told by stating the date and location. The exchange of currency can be a hassle, and it includes multiple steps. While it's been a while, I can recall this essay, then going on to provide a very long and detailed explanation of how the exchange of currency happens, all written in such a way as to make it sound like a nightmarishly difficult process. The 1978 advertisement is the older ad, and the 2002 ad being the newer advertisement. World War II had just ended after Nazi Germany had taken over most of Europe, killing nearly 11,000 people, and more than half of them were of a Jewish background. In the Nazis' eyes, the Jews will be remembered as another person or another duty. I think this one was from the same essay as above. As early as 1886, Coca-Cola started off as a soda fountain beverage. Phallus in Latin means penis, thus the lipstick in the Chanel ad is actually representing a penis. In the period between 1900 and 2000, American culture has changed. The world that we live in has been centered on change from the beginning until now. Not from the same essay as above, the true historic story behind Pocahontas is that she was an 11 or 12-year-old naked girl running around being joyful and making friends with English grown men. It is absolutely understandable that if one wants to remain oppressed, they have every right to remain oppressed. For example, atoms are made up of protons and neutrons. Protons are positive charges, and electrons are negative charges. These charges attract to each other, creating an atom, and atoms make a living organism. The demonstration of an atom suggests that nature, meaning any living thing, is attracted to its opposite. With the theory of opposites attract, many believe that allowing homosexuals to marry would ruin the balance of life because they are not opposites. Torture tactics and interrogation are very effective, but they are not effective at all. There are good sides and bad sides to every issue, and they will always be different. Some context here. One of the assignments in this class was to look at a controversial film and take a stance on the controversy surrounding it. This student chose Borat, and this is how he chose to defend Borat as an important film. The jokes throughout the film, Borat, are used to serve a higher purpose than poke fun at different ethnic backgrounds and races. The most helpful hint that Charles gave to Americans was to fix the way that they were driving. In fact, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration did a study proving that traffic fatalities were down 4 in 2007, a year after the film Borat was released. Lowell. Now one may argue that this movie did not have enough of impact to change how Americans drove, but in fact this movie made over $128.5 million domestically. Barnes. This makes it clear that Borat was viewed by millions. Should patients feel the desire to end their death, then their desire should be granted. Story 20, not so much stupid as much as it was goddamn hilarious. My wife and I, both professors, were crossing the quad after a meeting. A very frantic girl runs across campus, yelling at the phone, "Just delete the really naked ones. It's my go-to ridiculous student story, and I never even knew her name." Story 21, I was in American Foreign Policy class, and on the first day of class, the professor asks, "What is the capital of Canada?" After a couple of incorrect guesses at Toronto and Montreal, one girl blurts out Albuquerque. The professor looks at her and says Albuquerque, as in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He got a good kick out of it. And on every test the rest of the semester, there was a multiple choice question asking for the capital of Canada, with Albuquerque as one of the choices. Story 22, I was a graduate TA. for an architectural history class last semester, and this one lovely student who got a 2,100 on his final exam, yes, you read that, correctly informed me, or the professor rather, that this class was way too hard. And you expect way too much of us. I obviously failed this class, so you and see you next semester. This was his written answer to the last essay question in a class that he's required to take as an architecture major with the only professor that teaches it. Story 23. In the first semester I ever taught freshman composition, I had a student who came to my office hours drunk, submitted a formal essay with a cover page that had his name and the course information written on it in different magic markers, and submitted another formal essay printed on 5 pages of fanfold, tractor feed printer paper with the tractor guide still attached. The pages not separated from each other, and with a staple in the upper left corner. Think about that for a moment. You can guess his grade. Story 24. I had a student come to office hours to contest his exam grade, specifically the short essays. I just don't think it's fair I lost points here and being punished for not knowing the right answer. Me, that's the point of an exam. Story 25. I worked as an English TA for adult high school classes at a community college. I was asked, did the Goths who sacked Rome wear black? And how did Shakespeare write Julius Caesar if Caesar died before Shakespeare was born? The most concerning, however, was the responses to an open book test cue. Name 3 elements: A, fire, water, and air. I was told that writing "This isn't Pokemon" on the test would be frowned upon by administration. Edit, I stand corrected. There is no air type in Pokemon. Edit to another story. I was sitting in on a college-level history course about day-to-day life in England between 1200 to 1250. The professor was talking about how important religion was to the peasants in their daily lives, and how some would have to walk several miles twice a day to attend Mass. At this point, the middle-aged woman sitting in the front of the class starts arguing with the professor about why didn't the peasants have a personal relationship with Jesus like I do, and that she believes that salvation comes from the personal relationship with Jesus, not from going to Mass. Without missing a beat, the professor responded those beliefs would make you a heretic and get you burned at the stake. Story 26. Obligatory, not a professor goes here. Okay, anyway, I was actually pretty solid bros with one of the professors in my major, a guy who had been teaching in the college for nearly 40 years. He was an oddball who everyone thought wasn't the sharpest bulb in the sky, and he'd tell me stories about dumb kids who tried to pull a fast one on him. The best one actually came with evidence, a note on yellowed paper head, kept from 1985. It was a piece torn off from something like a white paper bag with ballpoint writing, and all it said was, "Hello, Dar, Morningstar, I'm the doctor of Chris, last name redacted. He will not be in class today. Because he had a headache, I have prescribed him medicinal herb and have told him to listen to music. He will be doing that instead. Signed, Dr." Angry squiggle, he said it was the dumbest thing anyone had ever done, because the handwriting was easily recognized as the student's. He did let this kid off the hook, though, because had been through the 60s, so, and no, whatever, we almost framed that for his retirement, though. Story 27. I teach voice lessons. One of the course requirements is to attend concerts. We all have various ways that we audit actual attendance. In my first year, I made them write concert reports, as well as bring me a program or ticket or some such. One student, who was always a little scattered, turned in a concert paper for a concert called the Annual Chancellor's Concert. As I read his paper, it quickly became apparent that he had not attended the concert, but rather had looked up the concert program online and attempted to write something relevant. This was apparent because the program he was writing about had occurred some 5 years earlier, and not on the concert that he was claiming to have attended. Apparently, the implications of the word annual was lost on him. Story 28. Creative writing. Day 1. Professor, I want everyone to say your name, major, and favorite author. This is the only time I will tell you to lie in class. If you don't have a favorite author, make one up. Student, I'm so-and-so. I'm an education major. I don't have a favorite author because I don't like to read. There were actually 2 students with that exact same answer. Same major too. Story 29. Not a professor, but this was when I was in grad school. Student in back of class, can you get antisocial personality disorder from a sneeze? Teacher, what? Student, my friend is really mean sometimes and acts like lists off random symptoms of antisocial, which we had been discussing that day, and he sneezed on me. I mean, do I go to the doctor and get shot? Crickets, how did this girl get into grad school? No, sweetie. No, you cannot get a non-communicable mental health disorder from a sneeze. Story 30 seconds. Stupidest thing I ever did as a student was take an exam in a class I wasn't signed up for. Girl I was dating was a nursing student, and I decided to hang out with her in her microbiology class since I had nothing better to do. Surprise quiz time. The microbiology taught to the nurses was a light version since it focused on mainly clinical use. I was a microbiology major. Since there was very few guys in nursing, the instructor realized I didn't belong but waited until and finished the quiz, took it from me, and quickly graded it. and then chewed out the entire class because this long-haired hippie that doesn't even take this class just made an A. What the is wrong with you people? I didn't get any more dates. My stupidest thing I ever did was far stupider. Story 31, not a professor, but a peer of mine thought that Arizona was a city in New Mexico. We had to get a map out cause she didn't believe us when we said she was wrong. Story 32, my dad's a college professor. Someone copied one of his published papers and handed it in. Took him about a page until he realized why the paper sounded so familiar. Story 33, math teacher here. During an exam, I was proctoring. A student called me over to ask, what do you mean? Give an example. Confronted student A after class about cheating on exam. Showed him the two tests from student A and student B, which had virtually identical wrong work, identical wrong answers, and even identical wrong graphs. Some mistakes are common. Most are unique. He proceeded to point how student B had done this while he, student A, had done that. Problem was he pointed to the wrong exams. He couldn't even tell which test was his, was teaching a class on logic during the presidential primaries. So I gave an extra credit assignment for them to find a logical fallacy in any nominee statement. I read a lot of Trump quotes that week. One student turned in a paper where he copied the image from news site that said how each nominee was illogical. One of the reasons listed was generally creepy. It somehow never occurred to him that this might not only be plagiarism, but wrong. Story 34, student vocally complained to the class about receiving a poor grade. Before I even graded her assignment, she eventually got a 1,010 on that assignment. For what it's worth, this continued throughout the semester. When I was submitting grades, I finally realized she was taking the class PNP. Story 35, I'm just a TA, but a surprising amount of students in labs like to turn in lab reports that their friends who already took the lab wrote in a previous semester. And I mean, they receive the lab report from their friend and then turn it in without even changing the name or date at the top of the paper. It happens every semester without fail. Story 36, I'm not a professor. But as a university student, I showed up for an English class a bit early, where one of the students was having an impromptu meeting with the prof about the required reading for the course. This was still early in the course. I'll never forget her holding the syllabus up to the professor and saying, but do we actually have to read these books? The prof just said, that's supposed to be the fun part, which was a pretty diplomatic response. I would have been a bit more incredulous. I don't know what she was expecting in university English class. Story 37, I'm not a prof, but I 25 became friend with an English prof 30 of mine. He taught Canadian literature and told me that someone in my class tried to hand in a CD of Canadian songs in place of a final essay. Oh dear, I thought this was pretty awful. Dear darn assignment. Story 38, I have never done well with an online class. Could you bump my grade from an F to an A? If you knew you could not handle an online class, then why sign up for an online class when the school offered 10 versions of the same class in person? Story 39, obligatory, not a professor. But in France, there was a gaggle of American students, probably freshmen like 18 to 20 years old, and I overheard the following student one who sounded either very jet-lagged or very high weight. Where are we? Student 2, with surprisingly sincere anger, we're in London, you idiot. This occurred smack dab in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. I like to think they were just really jet-lagged, but Jesus Christ. Story 40, math class for non-science majors. There were a total of 25 students in the class. I was planning on cheating on all of your tests and quizzes, but now I'm pretty sure you would catch me. Story 41, taught marketing for nonprofit organizations at a college that specializes in adult learning. A lot of the students are 30 who just got out of jail or is coming back to school to get a degree much later in life. I got a student who actually was working for a nonprofit in NYC at the same time while getting a degree. I actually support that nonprofit quite often. They have a great thrift store that sells awesome stuff and a great used bookstore. You should be able to figure out. Anyways, we were talking about fundraising, and one of the most common methods was a charity event. He said, oh yeah, we do one of those once a year. And I asked him, well, what is your expenditure for it each time? He said, about 50K. And I go, how much did you make each time? About 10K. Took me more than I wanted to explain to him and the class why this is an issue. Story 42. I once had a student who didn't know what an equal sign was. She was in college algebra. Edit, I apparently am bad at Reddit. And just saw all the replies and questions. My bad. I've written a brief-ish account below, but it'll include it as a separate edit if there's still interest. Story 43. In a 200-person classroom for General Chemistry Chem 1, we had our standard 3 tests and a final for the only grades in the class, no graded homework, projects, etc. On the screen was the standard professor's rules for the test. No hats. No headwear to prevent you from hiding earbuds, no spy pens, no cheating, etc. On test 3, one girl absolutely refused to put the hood down from her hoodie jacket. The professor stood next to her and said we are not starting the test until everyone is compliant with the rules and either put the hood down or leave. She left. That test was worth about 20 of our grade, and since no one ever got 100s, it nearly ensured that she would fail the course. Story 44, when my fiancé was taking English 1301. He has assigned peer reviews. The best one I remember in grading was an opinion paper. The quote I'm thinking of was both grammatically incorrect and false vegetables is protein. Story 45, just a college bio lab TA. But I have a story I like to tell. I was teaching a non-science majors lab at one point, and the students were filling out a packet on the anatomy of a fetal pig. One question was something along the lines of, what body system does the anus belong to? A girl asked me, because she said she didn't know. So I told her to just give me her best guess, and we can talk through it. She guessed the reproductive system. Story 46, not a college professor, but I just had my first class of the semester, and some girl opened with what's the point of metaphors in an English lit analyzing class. Story 47, not a professor, but was in the class. Okay, the course I was taking was Intro to Human Evolution, covered the science of evolution, the history of discoveries of our relatives in the genus, the chain of evolution that were the end result of, and how scientists classify animals, etc., etc. It was a fun class. Anyway, the class was your standard once-a-week lecture with a once-a-week lab section with a TA. It also had an online component through one of those courseware software packages that we'd use to turn stuff online and take quizzes and see the syllabus. There's also a chat room on the courses page. That's important. One week, the professor was out of town for a speaking engagement, so she arranged to have us watch a video in lecture to write a précis about it, sort of a short summary relating the contents of the video to the section of the course we were in, and turn it in. Easy. Well, someone found a copy of the movie on YouTube or something, watched it, wrote his précis ahead of time, so he wouldn't have to go to class. He sent his précis to his friend, who then posted a link to it and to the video on the courseware chat room. In a class of about 200 students, 180 or so didn't show up for the day of the video. I was not one of them. They had all watched the YouTube video and or used the guy's précis to write their own and turn it in. Some people just straight copied the guy's précis and modified some words. According to my TA, a couple of people didn't even go that far and just slapped their name on the top. The best part about the whole thing, not only was this was all arranged and talked about on the chat room on the courseware website that the professor and the TAs regularly read and participated in to answer questions and whatnot. The YouTube video that this all started with was The Wrong Movie. It had a similar title, but it was part of a series, and they had all watched and written about or copied words written about the wrong movie. So those of us who did the assignment properly got automatic as an extra credit. People who watched the YouTube video and wrote their own thing got DS. People who copied the original précis failed the assignment and were referred to the dean of students for academic dishonesty. Now I lied. This is the best part. A month and a half later, the professor had scheduled the same thing movie in class. Précis. About 5 people in the course did the same thing and, again, coordinated it in the classroom chat. They found a wrong video, copied another person's work, they were expelled. Story 48, in my community college class, a student went up to the prof to ask what the measures were if a bear came onto the campus. Prof said jokingly along the lines of the test would have to be postponed and classes would be canceled. The student nodded his head and sat down. 10 to 15 minutes later, the classroom door swings open and someone clearly in a bear costume bursts into the room growling. The student from the beginning ran by the costume person outside, saying, "I can get help." Prof laughed after chatting with the guy in costume and eventually gave us some amazing help that helped Mazel Tov, everyone get a passing score. The student didn't return at the start of the next semester. Also forgot to mention, this was in El Paso, Texas. We don't have bears. Story 49, I TA an intro to discrete math course and have done so for a few years. The quality of students has been on a decline lately. Some of the things they did during last year's final exam. One student wrote a page-long note explaining that they really couldn't afford to fail this course again, or else they would have to withdraw from the engineering program. They didn't come close to passing the final. Another student asked the prof during the exam for clarification because one of the questions asked them to prove something and they didn't think it was true. The prof told them that there was nothing wrong with the question and they should prove it. I ended up marking this question and they had written a note explaining this question is wrong, but I asked a proctor and they didn't seem to know anything. So assuming the question is supposed to be insert completely different thing here, then erase the proof, insert completely incorrect proof here. Note that they didn't even recognize their own professor. They also did not pass the final. Yet another student wrote a long note asking us to be generous with the marking because they had had a lot of exams. While I certainly understand the stress of exam season, it's something that every student has to go through. They did not pass either. For some reason, there were a lot of students writing messages to us that year. Dear students, if you're going to leave a message for the marker, it should at least be related to your answer, and not please give me marks that I fully admit I shouldn't get. If we give you free marks, then everyone will want M. Story 50, a student turned in an in-class essay, handwritten, that was written completely in class since I gave the topic right when they walked in the door. Normally, I just barely scanned the room as they were writing to make sure they weren't looking off of others. When I was at home grading the papers later, I noticed the paper was slightly off topic and used a lot of thou and thy, which was odd. The dumb thing is not that he plagiarized an entire paper from his flip phone during the class time, while I managed not to see him doing. So the dumb thing was that he plagiarized an essay word for word and couldn't remove obviously archaic language that nobody uses anymore. I mean, think about it. This kid wrote by hand every one of those thous and these. This is worse than a blind copy-paste, and likely took longer to write than just coming up with a topic on his own. WTF. Story 51, during my PhD, I taught a world geography class that had map quizzes. The first one was North America U.S. students, so it should be easy, right? A student raises his hand. So I come over, he pointed to the Pacific Ocean west of Mexico, and asks where's Alaska because he knows it's supposed to be there. Luckily, I haven't had any that bad since then, but I'm sure as the years go on, they'll get some more.